everyone. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another episode of the Sales Dev Squad podcast. It is your host, Mateo Elvira, here with a very special guest for you today. We will be speaking with Katie Morrissey, who is currently the Sales Development Manager over at Wistia. She has prior experience as an account executive for both Wistia as well as Hubspot. I'm super excited to have her on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Mateo, thank you for taking the time. I'm pumped to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I guess for starters here, Katie, do you mind just sharing a little bit with us about, I guess, your experience into sales? And then do you mind just sharing a little bit more about what you guys are doing over there at Wistia?
Yeah, for sure. So I got my start as a BDR at HubSpot. So really was selling inbound marketing and that concept I was a BDR there for about 1.5 years. And then I moved into an account executive role there and then moved over to Wistia to get into the video game. Been here for almost 3 years. So started as an account executive, then moved to a senior account executive. And now I'm leading one of the SDR teams over here. So we have an inbound SDR team and an outbound SDR team. So I head up the inbound SDR team over here.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I noticed like you had some prior experience working at like a Ocean Edge resort and golf club, a little bit of marketing experience as well. I'm curious though, Katie, do you mind just like sharing like what kind of like led to your transition into like tech sales with your like prior marketing experience?
It's a good question, and you're clearly a good SDR because you do pretty good research. So it's funny because I have an older brother and an older sister, and my brother is in tech and my sister is in pharmaceuticals. And I was like, okay, they're both pretty lucrative industries. And so I went to visit my brother at his tech company, and I went to visit my sister at her pharmaceutical company. And I said, okay, tech is definitely where I want to be. So I got my start as a BDR, just kind of, grinding, doing the day-to-day job. And I loved it. I think historically sales has gotten a pretty bad reputation from the old used car salesman and that vision that people have of sales folks, but it's really not like that at all. And so that's really how I fell in love with sales. And I really can't imagine doing really anything else but sales, which is kind of crazy. I never thought I would say that, but I truly enjoy it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And like, I'm also curious as well, Katie, like, did you know you always wanted to be an account executive? Because I see here, like you were a BDR for about almost 1.5 years, and then you transitioned to an account executive at HubSpot. And then you also transitioned to an account executive role at Wistia. Do you mind just sharing a little bit more, like what kind of led to your transition, like into a closing role, and then kind of how you became like a manager as well?
So when I was at HubSpot, honestly, being a BDR I loved it so much. I was like, this is honestly amazing. And I know there's various experiences of being a BDR, but I loved like looking at potential customers, reaching out to people that I really thought had a need for something that I was selling, and actually trying to find the pain point, which is pretty challenging, but I think is a pretty rewarding thing when you find something that someone's struggling with and have a solution. I think, working for a company where the product works, HubSpot I know works, HubSpot used Wistia, which is why I moved to Wistia. I knew that the product was a valid product. And then just the way that the HubSpot structure worked, I moved into an AE role just due to a sheer need of, hey, we have a lot of customers that we need basically more demand for people to be account executives. So I was promoted from a BDR to an account executive. And then HubSpot has an inbound conference every year, and I was at the inbound conference, and our CEO at HubSpot was saying that, basically the new role that people are going to need to hire for are videographers. Basically, you need some sort of video team in order to continue to create brand awareness, to continue to grow basically in the market. And so I was thinking about that, and then I knew we used Wistia. So then I got coffee with a VP of sales at Wistia, and we just clicked. And I wasn't even looking for a new job at that point, but I knew that this was somewhere I really wanted to be. So moved over to Wistia. Video is a fun thing to sell. We're kind of in the phase where a lot of people are adopting things like YouTube, but they don't necessarily have like a full blown out video strategy. So kind of helping them integrate video with their marketing automation platforms, with the current softwares they have, and kind of like helping them build that strategy is something that I love to do. And then just based on the growth of Wistia, there was a need for another SDR manager. And I love, coaching people. I was in sports. I studied abroad. I love like new things, coaching people, basically taking on new adventures. So that's my newest task. And it's a lot of fun.
What have you enjoyed the most about, transitioning to the sales manager role? And I guess like furthermore, what do you think has been the most challenging for you as well?
I think so. The most rewarding thing is just watching other people create opportunities. I think it's really fun for you personally to be able to sell deals, but I think it's also fun if you're, listening on a call with someone and you can help them basically create an opportunity, find the pain, like just basically helping them create the deal, sell the deal. In a lot of cases, SDRs here actually can sell deals, which is kind of rare. But like helping them, like yesterday I had an SDR who had a connect call and she was like, "Are you ready to get started today?" They said yes. And it was awesome to just be listening in on that call and just like hearing them be able to sell that. That to me is as good as me selling a deal. I find a lot of joy in that. So that for me is the most rewarding part. I think the hardest part is probably teaching everyone works a little bit differently. So figuring out what drives each individual person and what might drive you is not going to be what drives them. So you really need to get to know your team on a personal level and figure out, okay, what works for that person might not work for that person, and kind of coaching to each person a little bit differently because everyone's going to be driven by different things.
Absolutely. Super helpful information there. It's funny that you mentioned coaching because I'm actually reading this bad boy right now. I'm not
I
sure if you're
know.
Sales Manager Survival Guide by David Brock.
Yep.
And the chapter that I'm on right now is just, how important coaching is and how it's almost a necessity, kind of in the sales manager role. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more of like, what are some ways that you kind of make coaching fun for your team, or just more specifically, like if anyone listening out there, just has no idea what to do. And as far as coaching, like, do you mind maybe sharing a little bit more of kind of your tactics in that manner?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing for me is having a mentor outside of your company. So for me, Morgan Ingram, who's a pretty big voice in sales development, he's one of my best mentors and we meet pretty frequently. He also did a training here at Wistia, but I think, it's obviously important to be networked within your own company, but it's also important to step out for a minute and get advice from other folks. So that to me is really important. Reading, which you're doing a great job of. If you can, I think it's, people are like, "Oh, I don't want to do homework," things like that. But if you can read books like that, if you can read The Challenger Sale, if you can read different books that have, not only sales books, but maybe development books and books that are, I don't know, just whether you like audiobooks, whether you like to, for me, I like to highlight things. So I'm kind of like you, I like the physical copy, but a lot of people like to listen to it on their commute to work. That's helpful. So I think those things, just making sure that you have a network outside of your company, whether that's networking events, whether that's finding a mentor, whether that's reading books, reading blog posts, connecting with those folks. I think that's really important and something that you definitely need to make time for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. I think this is a perfect segue for us to kind of navigate to the next topic here. So I think you're the perfect person to ask this question since you've obviously worked at HubSpot. Some of my prior SDR experience has been a lot of cold outbound, and I just recently transitioned to a role where it's now primarily inbound. And I feel like my brain's actually wired kind of in a cold call way because I have to ask for permission. I'm asking gap questions. So I wanted to get your experience and your thoughts on this. Like what's the difference between inbound and outbound? Is there a significant difference? Do you have to tailor your messaging? I guess like just in the realm of inbound versus outbound, would love to just hear your thoughts.
I think it depends on your database, really. So I think the best advice that I got about when I was a BDR being like, you're a human nurturer. And I think that's some of the best advice that I ever received is that you literally just need to continue to nurture people, whether it's inbound, whether it's outbound, like that's basically your job. until they're ready for a meeting. You need to continue to provide value until they're ready to take that demo or to book that next call. So I think here it depends on the company you're at, because even at HubSpot, it was an inbound marketing company, but the database was so extensive that even if it was an inbound lead at one point, you're probably finding a new contact or a new VP of marketing or a new person where that company might exist in the database, but it's probably a new lead that you're reaching out to. So it's kind of like an inbound, outbound strategy, if you will. Like the company is familiar with the product, but that person might not be. Here at Wistia, it's primarily inbound, but I think that's what I like about sales and why I initially got into it. Part of it was that you're in charge of your destiny. Yeah, there's people helping you along the way, but basically as much effort you want to put in, that's what you're going to get out of it. And you're eventually going to get a yes. It's just a numbers game, basically. And the numbers don't lie. So if you know exactly how many people you're reaching out to, you know what your number is, you know where you are. And I think that for me is very helpful. Like I want to know, okay, I have a number, I'm going to get there. I know what I need to do to get there, as opposed to like, okay, you have a deadline for this presentation that's in a month or 3 weeks from now. I think for me, the way I work, and some people work like this, some people don't, but I like to have a number that I know that I need to get to by a certain month or quarter. I think that for me helps drive the activity as opposed to, writing some sort of post for a deadline. It's just how I like to work, basically.
Absolutely. Really appreciate that insight there. And I'm also curious as well, Katie, what are some like challenges? I know like every startup in every industry kind of has its own like special challenges. Do you mind sharing like some of the like unique challenges to your industry, company, and product, and I guess some of the ways that your team kind of goes about that?
Yeah, so I think our challenge is our main competitors are YouTube and Vimeo, which virtually every company has a YouTube channel, and it's been managed by multiple people on the team. And Vimeo is a great product, and they have a pretty big market presence. And so for us, we're going after a little bit different of a persona. So for us, we're third in the market in terms of market share. So it's YouTube, Vimeo, and Wistia. And so for us, we're primarily selling to marketers, so like VPs of marketing or demand generation folks. Whereas Vimeo is more tailored towards like the video producers. So a lot of like wedding videos, for instance, you'll see hosted on Vimeo. And YouTube, people figure that because it's owned by Google, YouTube is going to be a great source of SEO. So I think for us, those products are pretty cheap compared to Wistia's. Not expensive, not cheap. It's kind of in the middle of the road. So for us, it's kind of competing with a product that's free or virtually free and convincing someone to pay for it. But I think that's where the value prop comes in. It depends on what you're looking to do with video. If you're just simply looking to host and post, those platforms are great. If you want to put forms in your videos, if you're trying to use them for lead generation, if you're trying to integrate them with a marketing automation platform, that's where we come into play. So I think it's just knowing your audience and knowing who you're trying to reach out to and what they care about. Obviously, a founder is going to care about something a little bit different than a VP of marketing. So it's really just tailoring that message based on that persona, and then you can really figure out what the pain is. And I think the hardest part is having someone basically finding the pain without them realizing it's a pain. So, a lot of people think that things are going well, there's no urgency. But then you kind of dig in a little bit more and you ask the right questions and you figure out, okay, you might not realize that this is a pain, but this is actually really annoying for you in your day-to-day. So figuring that out is something that we work really hard at, and just figuring out the right questions to make sure that we're basically speak to the right people.
Absolutely. That's super helpful. So it seems like Wistia is almost like a hybrid of like a video platform, but really just aligning with your marketing and sales to ultimately just drive new business. Does that kind of sound correct? Or
yeah, exactly. It's basically people who video is kind of, I think a lot of people put video up there and are like, yeah, it's kind of expensive to produce videos, and we're not seeing a lot out of it because the current platforms that they have don't really give them a lot. But if you can give them something in return for the production or for that video person that they hired, and they can kind of justify that ROI for that, then it's valuable and it makes sense for them.
absolutely. Appreciate that. Katie, I noticed there's a quote on your LinkedIn that I really liked. It says, I find that the harder I work, the more luck I seem to have. And that's quoted by Mr. Thomas Jefferson. I'm curious, how can SDRs out there create more luck for themselves, so to speak? Or what are some steps that they can take to, find that success and find that luck?
I mean, so sales is a numbers game, but it's a numbers game if you're reaching out to the right people. So one of my favorite practices is a Pomodoro technique, which everyone's probably doing, but probably doesn't call it that. So it's basically blocking different times on your calendar for different activities and really dedicating that time to those activities. So if you have prospecting on your calendar, let's say from 9 to 11 in the morning, you are dedicating that time to prospecting. You're not on LinkedIn refreshing your feed. You're not on your email refreshing things. You are literally dedicated to doing that one task. And if someone wants to book a time with you at 10:30, if they're interested, they'd probably be willing to do 11:30. So I think that's the one thing that salespeople tend to do is you see something come in and you switch tasks and you dedicate your time to that. Whereas you really need to say, okay, if I'm going to dedicate 2 hours to prospecting, I really need to dedicate 2 hours to prospecting. If you're going to dedicate an hour and a half to follow up, you need to dedicate that time to follow up. So I think just making sure that your day is structured in a way that you really know, okay, this activity is meant for this time period, and you really stick to that. I think that is one of the key pieces that a lot of salespeople miss out on. I think a lot of people maybe block their calendar off for those times, but they're actually refreshing feeds or checking Instagram or doing something else in that time period. I think really making sure that you're doing that activity in that time period is really critical. And again, it's a numbers game, but if it's a crappy lead, don't reach out to it. You really want to focus your time on the people that you want to be targeting and that are a good fit for your business.
I love that. Thank you so much for that advice. And I know we're coming to the end of our sweet pod here. I just had a couple more questions for you, Katie. If you had a DeLorean that could travel 88 miles per hour and you could go back in time to maybe right before you started your BDR role for Hubspot, what advice would you give yourself after having all of this experience and knowledge in tech sales, management, closing role? If you had to share some advice with your prior self, what do you think that would be?
From an advice perspective, my favorite conversations are ones where you speak to someone that founded the business and you say, what was the need that you came across that caused you to literally create this business? And those are honestly my favorite conversations. And I wish I had more of them because the stories that you hear are awesome. It's like, obviously you saw a need in the market. You literally created a business, and a lot of businesses fail, but yours succeeded. Like, what did you do differently that other people aren't doing to make this business successful and potentially grow to, whatever the employee count is? But I think that to me is one of the coolest things. Like, you saw a need, you created a company, which is really gutsy. And then now you employ between 80 and let's say 1,000 people. Like, that to me is insane. And I love hearing those stories. And obviously it's harder to talk to, a president of a 1,000-person company than a 50-person company. But regardless, those conversations are awesome. And I wish I had more of those previously to just get more of those stories.
Absolutely. I love that. Couldn't agree with you more. And just one last question here for you, Katie. If anyone listening out there is maybe potentially considering a role as an SDR, but like you mentioned, right, the whole stigma or the stereotype of that sleazy car salesman is kind of holding them back, or maybe they're not sure like what a cold call actually is. What advice would you have for them?
Honestly, there's so many good training courses and conferences out there. So at Wistia, we give you money towards a professional development budget. So you can literally spend that on whatever you want to. And a lot of things you can do for really not a lot of money at all. And I would definitely tell people, read more of these books that, maybe you're sick of reading books from school, but I know business books don't sound fun, but like, read more of these types of books, go to conferences. Some of the best connections I've made are from networking at conferences. And whether it's at the conference, whether it's a happy hour afterwards, you don't have to drink, you can just go and talk to people. And those are some of the most valuable connections and conversations I've had. And I know networking can be scary. You sign up for something and then the day comes and you're like, I don't want to go to this. But I would really, really tell people like those are some of the best connections that you will make. and you can just have really candid one-to-one conversations that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think, just get out there. And if you're in sales, you should be comfortable having those conversations. So I think you'll be able to do it.
I love that. That's super helpful. Now, Katie, if anyone out there would like to learn more about career opportunities at Wistia or connect with you personally, I guess where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. I would say LinkedIn is probably what I'm on most. And so just Katie Morrissey at Wistia on LinkedIn, send me a message. It's KT_more on Twitter, but I would say LinkedIn is probably where I live the most. And send me a message. I'm happy to talk. That's how you and I got connected. So I'm definitely happy to, answer questions or chat. I always love, making more connections.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Katie. I know the Sales Dev Squad community is
Love
very
it.
thankful for your words of
Love
wisdom
what you're
here.
doing. Yeah, it's awesome.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. I will have Katie's contact information below in the comments. We'll catch you guys on the next one. And thank you so much, Katie, for your time.
Thanks, Mateo. Take care.